The furnace technician was still in my driveway when I pulled in from the grocery run, and something about the way he was standing told me he'd been waiting for me specifically. His name was Ted, from the HVAC company Gordon had called that morning before leaving for work. I recognized the van, white, with the red maple leaf logo on the side, because I had been the one to schedule the appointment 3 weeks earlier. The furnace had been making a low grinding sound since November, the kind that starts out ignorable and slowly becomes all you can hear. I'd called 4 times before they had a February slot available. But it was 4:30 in the afternoon. A furnace call in a 3-bedroom semi-detached in Hamilton shouldn't take 6 hours. I rolled down my window and Ted walked over. He was maybe 55, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of a man who spent his winters going in and out of cold garages. He had his toque in his hands, and he was turning it in circles, which men do when they are trying to decide whether to say something they don't want to say. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, "I finished up about 2 hours ago." I cut the engine. The February air hit me the second I opened the door, the particular cold of a southern Ontario evening when the wind comes off the lake and finds every gap in your coat. "Everything okay with the furnace?" I asked. He nodded, but he didn't move. I stood there in my driveway on Ravenscliffe Avenue with a bag of groceries in each hand and waited. "Your husband came home around noon," Ted said finally. I was still in the utility room. I don't think he knew I was there. A pause. "He was on the phone for a while. I heard things I probably shouldn't have." I set the grocery bags down on the salted front step. "Tell me," I said. "I need to go back further, because none of what came next makes sense without the years that came before it." 11 years of marriage, specifically. The kind of stretch where you stop tracking the individual days and start measuring time in renovations, in winter tires changed, in which Christmas was the one where Gordon's mother, Ruth, cried at dinner because we'd spent Boxing Day with my family instead of hers. My name is Delia Hargrove. I'm 36 years old, and I have run a small bookkeeping practice from the back bedroom of our house since our daughter Naomi was 7 months old. Not the glamorous kind of accounting, no corporate clients, no Bay Street connections. I do the books for small businesses, a physiotherapy clinic in Dundas, a Greek restaurant on King Street East, a woman who runs a dog grooming trailer out of Waterdown and has never once filed her HST on time. I do it all on a laptop at a standing desk next to a window that faces the back fence, and some years it earns me $40,000, and some years $62,000, depending on who's had a good quarter, and who's decided to try QuickBooks on their own and then called me in tears by March. It is not impressive work by some standards. But it has paid our property taxes for 7 of the past 11 years, and Gordon knows it, even if he's never said it plainly. Gordon Hargrove is 43 and works as a senior project manager for a property development company based in Mississauga. He drives the 403 both ways every day and has been doing it for 8 years, since his firm moved west of the city. He is tall, dark-haired, the kind of man who gets described as dependable in the same breath as attractive. And for a long time, I believed both things equally. We met in 2013 at a mutual friend's housewarming in Westdale, got serious by Christmas, married by October of 2015 in a ceremony at the Royal Botanical Gardens that was so ordinary and so exactly what I wanted that I still think about those photographs when things feel complicated. Ruth was at the wedding. Ruth has been at everything, which is part of how I know her so well, and part of how she has become so thoroughly woven into the structure of our life that pulling at one thread risks the whole thing coming loose. Ruth Hargrove is 70 years old and lives in a bungalow in Ancaster, 20 minutes from our house. She was widowed when Gordon was 24. His father, Donald, died of a sudden cardiac event, which Ruth has treated as both a tragedy and a source of permanent authority over Gordon ever since. She raised him alone after the divorce when he was 12, which is true, and which she mentions in a way that makes the word alone sound like a medal she earned and never took off. From the beginning of our marriage, Ruth had opinions. About the house we chose. Too close to the escarpment, she said, as though geography were a character flaw. About the way I kept the kitchen. About the fact that I worked from home, which she seemed to view as something between a hobby and a moral failing. Gordon needs someone who's really present, she told me once, at a family dinner where Gordon was sitting 3 feet away and said nothing. I let it go. I let a lot of things go. That is the thing about 11 years. You build up such a thick layer of let it go that by the time something real happens, you have to dig through a decade of sediment to find what you actually feel. The money started becoming an issue around year 4. Donald had left Ruth a modest life insurance payout when he died, somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000. Ruth had invested it, which I respected. What I hadn't understood, not fully, was that she had also begun distributing it to Gordon in what she called bridging help. Money that appeared when we had a shortfall, attached to a handwritten note and a vague repayment expectation. The first time was when we needed to replace the roof in 2018. $12,000 because the insurance claim came in $3,000 short and we'd had a slow year. Gordon told me at dinner, the way you mention a bill you've already paid. Mom's going to help with the difference. I put down my fork. You didn't ask me first, I said. It was faster, he said. And there was that look, the one I was beginning to catalog. Patient, faintly tired, as though my having a response to something was itself an imposition. We're a team, Gordon. We decide things together. He nodded in the way that means he heard me and did not intend to change his behavior. There were 3 more instances after that. Each one followed the same shape. A shortfall, a phone call to Ancaster I wasn't part of, a handwritten note in Ruth's careful cursive. Each time Gordon would tell me it was handled. Each time I would feel the specific unease of someone who knows something is being held just out of their line of sight. What I didn't know then was that Ruth was keeping records. Not on scraps of paper. In a spreadsheet she printed out and kept in a manila folder in the filing cabinet in her spare bedroom, complete with dates, amounts, and an interest rate of 4.5% she had decided upon herself without telling either of us. The summer everything broke open was the summer Gordon turned 43, and Naomi moved from her apartment in Kensington Market to a slightly larger one in Leslieville, and I turned 36 and realized I had not felt like myself in a very long time. Gordon had been working longer hours since the previous fall. Mississauga is an easy excuse. The 403 is a real traffic corridor, and the commute genuinely varies. I told myself this, methodically, the way you tell yourself things when you are trying to decide whether to know something. In December, I found a receipt in his jacket when I was taking it to the dry cleaner. A restaurant in Oakville, a Tuesday night. A bill for 2 people, wine included, charged to a credit card I did not recognize the last 4 digits of. I put the receipt back in the pocket and took the jacket to the cleaner anyway, and I waited. And I watched, and I told myself, the way I had told myself so many things over 11 years, that there was probably an explanation. By February, I had 3 more receipts, 2 hotel charges in Oakville, both Friday nights. A florist charge from a shop near Gordon's office on a Thursday for an amount that suggested not a card with the billing or a fistful of gas station carnations, but something considered. Something selected. I did not confront him. This is the part I find hardest to explain. I was not passive because I was afraid. I was waiting. The same way Naomi, I would later learn, had been waiting, because I wanted to understand the full shape of the thing before I moved. 20 years of doing other people's bookkeeping had taught me that the numbers always tell you more than anyone means to share, but you have to look at all of them before you draw your conclusions. So I was still looking, still calculating, on the afternoon I came home to find Ted standing in my driveway in the February cold. He told me what he'd heard. Gordon had come home around noon, unusual, but not alarming on its own. Ted had been finishing up in the utility room off the back hallway, replacing a component on the heat exchanger, when he heard the side door open. He'd called out to announce himself, but Gordon had been on the phone and apparently hadn't heard, because he walked straight through to the kitchen and kept talking. Ted said he hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He'd started to come out of the utility room twice and then stopped himself both times, because by then he'd heard enough that interrupting felt worse than staying put. What Gordon had said, as best Ted could reconstruct it, was this: that he'd been talking to his lawyer, that the process was more straightforward than expected because the house was the main asset, that his share of the equity would be enough to put a down payment on something in Oakville, that he needed another 3 or 4 months to finalize the arrangement, that she should stop worrying. Ted had finished his paperwork, left the invoice on the kitchen counter, let himself out quietly, and then sat in his van in my driveway for 2 hours because he had a wife at home and 3 daughters, and he could not bring himself to simply drive away. I thanked him. I meant it. He handed me a card with his company number and said if I ever needed anything else with the furnace, just call, and I had the sense that anything else was doing a lot of work in that sentence. I went inside. The invoice was on the kitchen counter. $487 including HST, payable within 30 days. The furnace was fixed. Everything else had been broken for much longer than I'd understood. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, not the floor. I sat in one of the kitchen chairs and looked at the window and let the information settle, the way cold water settles in a glass. Quietly. Completely. Gordon had a lawyer. He had a plan. He had someone in Oakville and a down payment in mind and a timeline of 3 to 4 months, and he had sat across from me at that same table last Sunday morning, eating a toasted bagel and talking about whether we should refinance in the spring. I called Naomi at 6 o'clock that evening. She picked up on the second ring. Mom, just my name, in that particular tone that told me she had been waiting for this call. I need to tell you some things, I said, and then I need you to tell me what you know. A silence. How much do you know already? She asked. Enough to call you, I said. Not enough to understand the money. The word money landed between us with a specific weight. The folder in Grandma Ruth's spare bedroom, she said, and it wasn't a question. I went still. Tell me. She exhaled slowly, the way she does when she is choosing her words with more care than usual, a habit she's had since she was 12, when she figured out that some things, once said aloud, cannot be unsaid. What Naomi told me that evening, sitting cross-legged on her couch in Leslieville with her dog in her lap and me in my kitchen with Gordon not yet home from wherever Gordon actually was this. She had visited Ruth for Thanksgiving 2 years ago. She had gone to use the spare bedroom to charge her phone and had found the manila folder partially open on the desk. She had seen 3 pages before Ruth appeared in the doorway and set a hand flat on the cover without a word. 3 pages was enough. The folder documented every transfer Ruth had made to Gordon going back to 2017. Amounts, dates, and a column labeled balance with interest. 4.5% compounded annually, applied to each entry from the date it was given. The total on the most recent page, as of the previous September, was $58,400. $58,000. That is not a rounding error. That is a number someone built carefully over years and kept hidden because its power depended entirely on being unknown. Gordon's truck pulled into the driveway while Naomi was still talking. I had maybe 90 seconds. "Come this weekend," I said. "Don't tell him. And Naomi, do you know a family lawyer?" A brief pause. "My friend's sister. She practices in Hamilton. I'll text you her number." I set my phone face down on the table just as Gordon came in through the side door, grocery bags in hand. He'd stopped at the metro on his way back from wherever. He looked at me. I was standing at the counter with a spatula in my hand, as though I'd been about to cook dinner, which I had not been. "Good day," he asked. "Productive," I said, and turned toward the stove. He didn't notice. He never noticed. That was the thing about a man who had spent years not noticing. He had no framework for suspicion, because in his mind I was simply where I always was. Naomi arrived on Saturday morning, 4 days later, with her overnight bag and a woman named Abena Asare, who was 38, a paralegal at a family law firm in downtown Hamilton. Abena had warm eyes and very precise handwriting, and she sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and asked me to tell her everything I remembered about our finances in chronological order. I talked for nearly 2 hours. She filled 6 pages. Then she set her pen down and said, "In Ontario, family law works on the principle of equalization of net family property. What you brought into the marriage stays yours. Sarah's, what accumulated during the marriage, including your bookkeeping income, which is documented, gets equalized. The house, which has appreciated considerably since 2015, is your primary asset. The critical question is whether Ruth's transfers can be characterized as gifts or debts." "Debs," I said. "She tracks them with interest." Interest, she set herself, in a document she created unilaterally, with no signed agreement and no disclosure to you as Gordon's spouse for 11 years. Abena turned her legal pad to a fresh page. A family court will look at the substance of an arrangement, not just whatever label someone put on it. An undisclosed, informally recorded debt created by a parent to maintain leverage over an adult child is not the same as a formal loan. If Ruth tries to claim this against marital assets in equalization proceedings, she is going to need something considerably more credible than a folder she kept in her spare bedroom. I looked at Naomi. She was watching me with the expression she'd had at 12 when she'd already figured out the ending of a book and was waiting to see whether I'd catch up. Gordon was served the following Thursday. Not at the house. Abena had recommended his office in Mississauga, neutral ground, no opportunity for a scene that gets remembered by neighbors. He called me 20 minutes after it happened. I was at my standing desk in the back bedroom, finishing a reconciliation for the restaurant on King Street East. "Delia," just my name, all the air let out of it. "I know," I said. "We could have talked about this." "We've been talking," I said. "You've been planning. There's a difference." A long pause. "Is this because of Cecile?" I had not heard her name aloud before that moment. I had receipts from a florist and 2 hotel charges, and the word "she," spoken in my own kitchen to a lawyer on a phone my husband hadn't known was being overheard. And now I had Cecile. "Cecile is the part I could see," I said. "This is about the folder Ruth's been keeping, and every time you looked at me like my concerns were an obstacle, and every HST return I filed for someone else's business at 11 o'clock at night so we could make our mortgage payment while you were figuring out what you wanted your life to look like. Cecile is the last line. She's not the ledger." He didn't say anything for a while. "Mom's going to." "I know what Ruth is going to do," I said. She's going to try to claim $58,000 as debt against the marital estate. And she is going to find that a spreadsheet she printed on her home computer in Ancaster, Ontario, with an interest rate she set herself and never disclosed to me, does not constitute a legally enforceable loan instrument. Abena has already confirmed there is no documentation filed anywhere, no promissory note, no signed agreement, nothing registered against the property. A silence so long I could hear the hum of the overhead light. "How do you know about the folder?" he said finally. "Naomi saw it 2 years ago," I said. "She was waiting for me to be ready." He exhaled, slow, long, the sound of a man setting down something very heavy. "I didn't know it was that much," he said. And I believed him. That was the thing I hadn't expected. I believed him completely. Ruth had kept him just informed enough to feel grateful and just uninformed enough to keep coming back. He had let her do it for 20 years, and I had been the person who absorbed the cost of that arrangement, keeping his books balanced and his house warm, and his life running smoothly enough that he'd had the time and the mental space to plan a different one. "I know you didn't," I said. "That's also not my problem anymore." Ruth arrived at the house uninvited 3 weeks later. A Wednesday afternoon in March, when the snow was finally going gray at the edges and the first mud was showing through the lawn. I heard her Camry in the driveway and her key in the front lock. She'd had a key since 2017 and had never once knocked. She found me at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, still in her coat, hands folded over her purse, silver hair set in the careful waves she maintained every weekend without exception. "You've involved a lawyer," she said. "I have," I said. "After everything this family has done." I pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. This surprised her. She had expected me to stand, to manage the room the way I always had, to be 20% smaller than I actually was. "Sit down, Ruth," I said. She didn't. "Your choice," I said. "Here's what's going to happen. Abena Asare has filed a records request for any formal documentation of the transfers you made to Gordon between 2017 and last year. There is no promissory note. There is no signed agreement. There is nothing registered against our property or filed with any financial institution in this province. What exists is a spreadsheet you made on your own computer with an interest rate you decided upon by yourself and never disclosed to me as Gordon's legal spouse. In equalization proceedings, that is not a debt. It is an undocumented series of gifts from a parent to an adult child." Something moved behind her eyes. The composure held, but only just. "Those were loans," she said. "He signed acknowledgments. He signed notes you wrote yourself at your kitchen table with interest you set without telling either of us and without any witness, any notary, or any disclosure. You want to bring those to a family court in Ontario, Ruth? You go right ahead. I will be sitting right there." She gripped her purse. "I was helping my son." "You were keeping your son," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had expected. "There is a difference. You kept him feeling like he owed you something so that he would keep coming back to you for permission. And for 11 years, I was the wife on the other side of that arrangement, paying property taxes with bookkeeping income and filing returns for dog groomers and doing my share, and then some. And not once did you acknowledge that. You were supposed to be grateful," Ruth said quietly. "I was grateful," I said. "I was also invisible. Those two things can be true at the same time." She left 10 minutes later. The front door closed with a precise, deliberate click. She was too composed for a slam, but that click carried everything a slam would have. The divorce took 9 months. Gordon did not fight it the way I had braced for. I think in the end he was tired, too. Tired of the version of himself he had been maintaining. Ruth's claim against the marital assets was challenged by Abina on the grounds of insufficient documentation and lack of spousal disclosure, and after a brief standoff, Ruth's solicitor advised her to withdraw. Gordon and I sold the house on Ravenscliff Avenue in August in a market that had been unkind to buyers and generous to sellers, and I walked away with enough equity to put a substantial down payment on a smaller place in Dundas. Closer to the escarpment trails I had always loved and never had enough time to walk. Naomi drove up from Toronto the weekend I moved in. We carried boxes and attempted an IKEA bookshelf that defeated us both for 40 minutes before we gave up and ordered Thai food and sat on the floor of the half-unpacked living room with Archer containers and a bottle of Ontario Red, the kind neither of us usually bothered to buy. "You good?" she said. I looked around the room, the boxes, the bare walls, the window that would, in the right morning light, show me the hillside. "I'm getting there," I said. And for the first time in a very long time, I meant it exactly.